You know, it's only just occurred to me recently that a lot of Fact Hunt articles have featured completely messed up review scores. Obviously there's a Drivergate scandal being a prime example, and Arthur Gee's flip-flopping of SimCity in my Stupid Journalists episode as another. However, these are just the very tip of the iceberg. There's plenty more suspiciously high or low review scores out there, with even more fascinating consequences from angry publishers and fans in general behind them. So this episode, I take a look at those suspect scores and those regrettable reviews, all of which are easier to see through than Peter Molyneux's hairline. But, hello you, I'm Guru Larry, and I welcome you to Fact Hunt. 5 suspicious review scores with insane backlashes. People love to coin the phrase, "you can't spell ignorant without IGN," to point out IGN's failures. 90% of the time, it's just a dig from angry fanboys. But in this case, nothing could be closer to the truth. Now, after Sonic the Hedgehog, the Football Manager series is surprisingly Sega's biggest franchise nowadays, where if the title wasn't self-explanatory enough, you're a football manager and you manage a football team, with all those super intricate stat managements that all those statos out there love to spend months of their lives, well, micromanaging. I'm saying the word manager a lot in this segment, aren't I? Anyhow, roll on to their 2009 edition, and IGN UK's review of the game completely nailed it, fully understanding the concept of a football management game and scoring it accordingly, giving it a very respectable 9.1 out of 10. However, IGN's US division had the concept of a football management game fly completely over their heads when they covered the game under its American title, Worldwide Soccer Manager 2009. The reviewer, Avi Burke, who definitely lives up to his name, ripped it to shreds, attacking it for not being an action game with completely idiotic comments such as far as traditional gameplay goes, there really isn't any. Apart from managing your roster and coaching your team, there isn't anything to do at all. It offers little to nothing that would appeal to a casual fan of the sport or the average video game enthusiast. I couldn't imagine why anybody would prefer Worldwide Soccer Manager to FIFA 09 or Pro Evolution Soccer 2009. Avi then slaps it with an abysmal 2 out of 10. Needless to say, IGN's readers and the gaming press in general latched onto Avi's ignorance of the concept of the soccer management genre, forcing IGN to delete the review, issue an apology to both Sega and their viewers, then re-reviewing it a week later with a slightly less silly score of 7.9 out of 10. Hilariously, Avi Burke was also the sports editor of IGN at the time. You know, as in a person primarily hired for their knowledge and management of sports-based video game reviewing. You had one job, Avi. One job. What? Eurogamer are on this list too? Yup, it came as a surprise to me as well. But it seems even the virtue signalers of journalistic integrity themselves aren't above being embroiled in review score controversy once in a while. Now, MMORPGs are one of the hardest genres to crack for a publisher, with millions of dollars pumped into creating a virtual new world. It's vital to constantly build and maintain a large paying user base, so getting as much positive press as possible in its early days is a matter of life or death. But in 2009, when Eurogamer's Ed Zitron gave MMO Darkfall their lowest ever score of 2 out of 10, the developer Adventuring wasn't exactly too impressed by this savage judgment they received for a title they invested 8 years of hard work into, with scathing quotes such as, "It's the Emperor's New Clothes of 2009, such a marvellous game that only an idiot would realise the beauty of the gaping holes in its content, its wonky control system, and its seemingly decade-old engine." At first, Adventuring tried to appeal to Eurogamer, suggesting that the reviewer simply didn't understand how to play the game properly. But after fans began to notice inaccuracies in Zitron's complaints, Adventuring looked into the two accounts they had supplied Eurogamer for the review. Shockingly, the two accounts had hardly been used at all. The first account only had 3 minutes of gameplay in total on it, and the second, believed to be the one Zitron used, raked in at less than 2 hours, with most of that time being used to simply create a new character, and the rest taking screenshots for the actual review. Angered by this unfair bashing from someone who clearly hadn't even played the game, Darkfall's associate producer, Tassos Flemboris, went to Darkfall's forums claiming, "The entire review is opinionated and hostile. It attacks the game, the creators, and the company at every chance." The creators and developer of Darkfall, as well as the Darkfall community through its reaction, consider this review suspect and question the motives behind its publication. "We could take a bad review, but not like this. Even the worst reviews that we receive commend our efforts and speak of the potential of Darkfall. The majority of our players love the game. This review might keep new players from ever trying a game they would enjoy." With the drama spreading and websites such as The Escapist trying to fan the flames, Eurogamer's editor-in-chief Tom Bramwell posted a rebuttal to Adventuring's claims, saying that Zitron had actually played the game for at least 10 hours and they fully supported his opinions on the game, but offered to re-review the game for good measure. Which they did, even if the majority of the piece was responding to the original review's complaints and questioning the validity of MMO reviews in general. But Eurogamer concluded by upping the final score to 4 out of 10. In Eurogamer's defence, reviewing an MMO in general is a hugely demanding feat. Trying to experience a game meant to be played for months, if not years at a time, is a borderline impossible task. And while Adventuring's demands of them needing to play the game for at least 100 hours to give it a fair review is a little unrealistic, the negative press never actually affected sales in the long run. Darkfall servers ran for a total of 3 years, which is really good innings for a relatively unknown MMO, before finally shutting down in 2012. And as for Ed Zitron, well, Eurogamer continued to defend his opinions and reviews by promptly firing him. Long before Steam was a twinkling Gabe Newell's overweight eyeball, GameSpy was the place to go to download and play online PC games. In fact, they had such a monopoly on the online gaming scene, they even hosted a number of console games too, including obtaining all the online hosting rights for the Nintendo GameCube. However, as much as an honour as it was to host Nintendo servers, when it came to reviewing their seminal cover tune plastic drum slap 'em up Donkey Konga 2, they weren't exactly that bothered about covering it so much, so palmed the job off to Nick Marangos, a freelance reviewer. Nick, however, thought the game was utter crap, and promptly scored it 1.5 out of 5. Fair dues, but when his review was published on GameSpy, it had mysteriously jumped up to an average 3 out of 5, and had several changes to appear far more positive. Nick obviously wasn't too happy about this uninformed change to the game he thought was terrible, so quickly ranted about it on his blog. The news quickly spread to Penny Arcade, who posted an editorial on the suspicious score doctoring situation, as well as parodying the situation in a strip, causing a huge backlash online. GameSpy made no apologies. They deleted Mr. Marangos' entire review, then 3 weeks later replaced it with an all-new review, this time upping the score even higher to an above-average 3.5 out of 5. Nick Marangos, however, was never hired by them again. Needless to say, younger viewers may notice that GameSpy no longer exists on the interwebs, and that's because they were bought out in 2013 by IGN of all people. But a gaming website changing review scores to appease a publisher giving them vast amounts of money, then firing the reviewer? Now, that sounds awfully familiar. Well, it was obviously this I was referring to. The GameSpot KANE and LYNCH event is probably the most famous review score drama on our list. But since it happened over a decade ago now, some of you out there in internet land may not even be aware of this event. So sit back and enjoy my mouth noises. Now, IO Interactive is a well-respected publisher in the industry, making great games such as Freedom Fighters, which I wish they'd hurry up and make a sequel to, Mini Ninjas, well okay, not so much for that one, but are most famous nowadays for the Hitman series. But back in 2007, IO are about to release a new IP by the name of KANE and LYNCH Dead Men, a Michael Mann's Heat-inspired third-person shooter starring the aforementioned KANE and LYNCH, two escaped prisoners working together to repay a debt to the Mafia, whom have also kidnapped KANE's wife and daughter, as, you know, a plotline sole about being kidnapped by the Mafia was considered too original, so they needed to add women being kidnapped to fulfill its video game cliché quota. Anyhow, KANE and LYNCH's publisher, Eidos Interactive, now known as Square Enix, were super excited about the release of this edgy, I said edgy, not edge, Tim, serious adult video game, so pumped millions into promoting it across the internet, and most notably of all with GameSpot, who made a deal with Eidos to display a giant banner promoting their game across its entire website for several weeks. However, as the old saying goes, you can't polish a turd. And despite being paid to spam the hell out of their game, GameSpot's editor, Jeff Gertzman, didn't think KANE and LYNCH was that hot, so scored it a slightly below average 6 out of 10 in his video review for the site.
KANE and LYNCH Dead Men is an ugly, ugly game. That's not necessarily me talking just about the graphics. It's got a really ugly storyline with characters that are impossible to like, and it's a third-person shooter that has several gameplay flaws as well.
GameSpot were outraged by the score and demanded that Gertzman change his review. Jeff stuck to his guns and refused, so was promptly fired from the company. Speculation flew amongst the internet that Eidos had the power to influence GameSpot's reviews. So fear-mongering grew that if this was the case with other publishers too, and that the site was corrupt in general. But the truth is, GameSpot had then recently hired a new management team completely inexperienced with conversing with the editorial groups of the company and publishers in general. So when Eidos came thumping on their doors, threatening to pull their ad revenue from the company, the new management panicked, branded Gertzman as unreliable, and kicked him out of the company to appease their funders. Publishers throwing their toys out of the pram when they don't get their own way happens quite often, but GameSpot's new management didn't know this, nor knew how to handle the situation, as evidenced by their knee-jerk reaction and the huge negative backlash the company received and is still licking its wounds from to this day. Now, it's often believed that it was solely KANE and LYNCH that got Gertzman terminated, but it was essentially the straw that broke the camel's back. His staff's journalistic honesty had also come into conflict previously with management. Such heat notably from Sony when Aaron Thomas rated Ratchet & Clank Tools of Destruction a good 7.5 out of 10. Sony were angered by the average score in their eyes, so again threatened to pull revenue, so Gertzman was pulled into their office and warned about this situation also. So it's often misconceived that it was just one game that got him sacked. Gertzman, however, was rejoiced on the internet for his journalistic martyrdom, and rather than finding work elsewhere, created Giant Bomb. Then, 5 years later in 2012, went full circle and sold Giant Bomb to GameSpot's parent company, where, as of the writing of this episode, he still is. So, a good ending to a story for once. Well, sort of. But at least it didn't turn quite as sour as our final segment. The Jeff Gertzman incident may have been the most famous example, but our final segment completely annihilates it in drama, containing childish bickering, shit-stirring, and ultimately, a lawsuit. Now, you will remember Team 17 from the Offensive Cheat Codes episode, don't you? They were the cheeky chappies inserting all kinds of crude hilarity into their Commodore Amiga games and having some good old-fashioned 1990s fun all around. Unfortunately, they weren't quite as jovial towards the publication Amiga Power. You see, Amiga Power's scoring policy revolved around an average game being scored 50% rather than the more publisher-pleasing 70% that most other reviewers do, and still do even today. But Amiga Power were highly critical of Team 17's later releases on the Amiga during its final years. So when you release average games, those kinds of scores can come across as your game looking even more crap than it actually is compared to other publications. So, seeing these rather less than enthusiastic scores coming from Amiga Power, Team 17 started to build quite a resentment towards them. At first, it was just the odd dig at the magazine, using their distinct sense of humour. Such as Amiga Power gave Overdrive 46%, so Team 17 renamed all the terrible AI drivers in the game after their staff members. Amiga Power gave F-17 Challenge 55%, so Team 17 again named all the crap opponents in the game after them. Amiga Power gave Alien Breed 2 a rather respectable 81%. But Team 17 still stuck a cheat in the game where if you type in Amiga Power as a cheat, a secret message criticising Amiga Power's review policy appears on screen. And most distasteful of all, Amiga Power gave Tower Assault 46%, so Team 17 named the murdered pilot in the game after Amiga Power's writer, Jonathan Nash.
Nash is dead. You're on your own.
So, while all of this is happening, enter French computer magazine Amiga Concept. They were watching events unfolding from across the channel and decided to throw some gasoline on the drama fire. Now, Amiga Concept was already rather notorious about attacking fellow French gaming magazines for giving games low review scores. But in their May 1995 issue, Amiga Concept started an all-out libelous war against Amiga Power, pasting in bold letters on the magazine's cover, a rant. Amiga Power enjoys killing the Amiga. They then posted an article inside which all out accused Amiga Power of not only taking bribes to purposely give all of Team 17's games terrible review scores, but also single-handedly trying to instigate the death of the Commodore Amiga in general. They also added a nice little cartoon of Amiga Power's editor taking a bribe to review Pac-Man. Bless. Various open letters threw between the three parties for a while. But after Amiga Power low-scored 2 Team 17 games in the same issue, the 10-pin bowling sim Kingpin scoring 47%, and Isometric Racer ATR a lowly 38%, they not only named all the crap opponents in the games after Amiga Power staff members yet again, they also slapped them with a lawsuit. Led on by the low scores and false accusations of bribery and corruption that Amiga Concept had fed them, Team 17 sued Amiga Power, demanding they stop maliciously lying about their games, never lie about future titles, actually play their games long enough to justify a fair review, hand over the names and addresses of the companies and individuals that had paid them to give them low scores, despite them not existing, and that the issue of Amiga Power in question be immediately removed from shelves. Amiga Power obviously laughed the lawsuit out of the office, completely bemused by Team 17's neurotic accusations. They pointed out how preposterous it was that there were people paying them to slander Team 17's games, then sent out a list of all the reasons why they had actually given them low scores. Needless to say, with no evidence to back up their accusations, Team 17 withdrew the lawsuit, then promptly blacklisted Amiga Power from ever receiving review copies again. Amiga Power never ensued libel actions against Amiga Concept due to slander cases being notoriously difficult to pursue in another country, so ultimately didn't bother. So the moral of this story is, if you think a game is boring but you still want to suck up to the publisher, give it 7 out of 10. Everyone's happy then. Well, unless you work for gaming journalist Dave Perry.
Not a journalist, I'm a marketing manager.
In which case, he'd fire you on the spot for that. Hello you. Thanks ever so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to be first to see future Fact Hunt episodes. Click on the bell if you already are to make sure you're notified. And be sure to check out my other episodes. And if you want to be super awesome, check out my Patreon. But thanks again for watching, and I'll be seeing you next time. Ta-ra for now.